Well, my dear friends, I want to tell you about one of my favorite words in all the Bible. This is a word that usually doesn't quite get translated into your English versions. And so a lot of times it has its version in Hebrew and Greek. It's usually there in the original text, but it doesn't really get translated into English very often because it's the kind of word that there's not really a great translation for it in English, and it's not really a word that you would use when you're writing things in English, especially if you want to sound professional or official. That word in Greek is idu. Idu. And literally what the word means is it's a command. Look, look. And what happens is the gospel writers, especially Matthew, it's kind of fun. He's telling you what's happening. He's telling you the story. He's going event by event, and all of a sudden he'll just say, it's an attention-grabbing word, and it's like he's there with you, and he's telling you what's going on, and then he grabs your shoulder and says, "Hey, look at that! Look at that!" And that's exactly what happens here in the first verse of the text. I'll give you the literal Greek translation. After or when Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, right, Magi from the came to Jerusalem. That's how it goes in the Greek. And so you can see that Matthew is almost shocked that these Magi are here to see and enjoy and celebrate and worship Jesus. And actually, for reasons we'll get into in a bit, all of Matthew's original readers, the first readers of this gospel, who were most likely Jewish believers in Jesus, would have been absolutely shocked that these magi are here. So the theme for today is really the question that Matthew and most of his original audience would have asked when reading this. Magi, what are they doing here? And we're going to learn three things. Firstly, who the Magi are and where the Magi are. Second, how did they find Jesus? That's important. And thirdly, why did Matthew feel the need to tell us this? Matthew could have told us so many things about, Christmas. Why did he have to tell us about the Magi? So, who were the Magi? Really important to talk about who the Magi actually were. And first we'll go and say who the Magi were not. They were not kings. So I'm sorry if your favorite song at Christmas is We Three Kings of Orient. They were not kings. That's a tradition that kind of came out a few centuries later. They were not kings. They also, there weren't three of them. They have three gifts, but Matthew never says, how many there were. It just says, Magi. Also, another name that we always call them is the wise men. That's not what Matthew says. In fact, Matthew and his original readers would probably have not considered these magi to be wise. Magi, that term, which in Greek is magoi, the most literal translation would be magician, or sorcerer, or spellcaster, or astrology. Someone who is deeply involved with witchcraft and the dark arts and casting spells on people and fortune telling and summoning and consulting with dark spirits. That's probably the most accurate translation of that word, magi. Kind of interesting. If you go to you don't see this word very often in the New Testament. Magoi. What exactly is that? If you go to the Old Testament, especially the Greek translation of the Old Testament, that word does show up. If you remember studying the book of Daniel in Bible study, you might remember that Daniel was a part of a group of men that were advisors to King Nebuchadnezzar. And there was that one time when Nebuchadnezzar had that terrifying dream, and he summoned, and you might remember this, all of his magicians and sorcerers and spellcasters. That's where that word shows up in Greek. So that's kind of what we're dealing with here. These were men who were not just dabbling in, but were experts in witchcraft. Also, it says that they were from the east. Well, if geographically, there's a lot of things that are east of Israel. It could be Arabia, it could be Persia, it could be Babylon, which is modern day, Iraq and Iran. Well, we're not exactly sure where these guys are from, but they clearly were very wealthy. They likely were in employment to someone who was a powerful ruler. They were clearly they had to know something about Jesus. We're not exactly sure how. This is kind of fascinating. The ancient historians in this time, these two guys are actually kind of how we know much of anything about Roman history. Their names are Suetonius and Tacitus, so ancient historians at this time. And they both mention that in some parts of the Roman Empire, that there were actually rumors of this great king that was supposed to be born in Judea, which is the southern, province of southern Israel. So you have that. Also, we do know that around this time, Jupiter and Saturn actually cross paths several times in 1 year to create this megastar. So it could have been that. It could have just been a supernatural star sent directly by God. We're not exactly sure. All we know is that these men, the Magi, are the last impossible people that you would ever expect to go and worship Jesus. And that is why Matthew says, look, there they are. Well, how did they find Jesus? How exactly did they find Jesus? Very important. Now, the classic quick answer is, oh, well, this guided them to Jesus. But read the text carefully. At the beginning, the star didn't guide them to Jerusalem. They saw the star, and that indicated to them that something powerful had happened. Now, that's kind of an interesting question. Why would they assume that, oh, there's a star in the sky, therefore a Savior in Judea has been born? This great king has been born. Why would they assume that? Well, okay, this goes back, I think, more than a year now. We studied the book of Numbers a little, more than a year ago in Bible study. The book of Numbers takes place about 1400s BC, about 1400 years before any of this happened in the Gospels. That's when Moses led the Israelites through the desert from Egypt into Israel, the promised land. And the book of Numbers tells us what happened there. If you remember, there was this episode where a guy named Balaam, okay, this guy named Balaam, who was a professional prophet, someone who could summon dark spirits and curse people if you paid him enough money. And so Israel's enemies actually summoned this guy named Balaam and said, hey, can you curse the Israelites for us? And he actually told them, no, right? Their God is actually so powerful that I can't do anything that he doesn't allow me to do, which is interesting because he actually acknowledges that God, the God of Israel, is really powerful, but he himself doesn't worship the God of Israel. But he gets tired anyway, and he tries. And instead of cursing the people of Israel, he actually blesses them. And this is one of the blessings that he says. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Israel. A scepter will rise out of Jacob. So, kind of putting the pieces together, it seems pretty likely that these magi, who were kind of, the same kind of work as Balaam, were actually guided by possibly this specific prophecy. And we're familiar, okay, there's going to be this great star, and then that's this king born in Israel. And so then they go to Jerusalem, but he's not there. Right? So what happens then? Well, then they have to go to the experts, the Bible scholars, right? The teachers of the law, the seminary professors at that time. And they say, well, specifically, Jesus is supposed to be born in Bethlehem, which is a few miles outside of Jerusalem. And so they go and they can't seem to find their way. And so then, okay, the star appears again. And so, I'm not exactly sure how this, but the star somehow guided them to the exact house where they were supposed to go. So now I ask you again, how exactly did the Magi find Jesus? How exactly did that happen? Let me ask you this. Did the Magi find Jesus because they were so educated and so smart and so sophisticated and so brilliant? No. No. Did they find Jesus because they were so moral and so faithful and so devout Well, clearly no, they were Magi. They got rich off of doing things that God explicitly told his people not to do. Well, how is it that they found Jesus? God revealed himself to them, and specifically he did it through his word. You notice that without the scriptures, without see from God in the Bible, in his word, this does not happen. That God revealed himself, and yeah, he used the star as well, but without the scriptures, they would never have found Jesus. Now, this is immediately applicable, and I just have to say this before I move on. I've met a lot of people, no one here, a lot of people that would say, well, I don't really, care for church. I feel closest to God when I'm out in the woods hunting. Or I feel closest to God when I'm out hiking in the woods, or whatever it is. Now, don't get me wrong. You can absolutely learn things about God from nature. Right? You can learn a lot about God by listening, sitting in the trees and watching the squirrels. You can learn a lot about God. You can certainly learn a lot about God by contemplating Him by yourself. Absolutely. You can learn a lot about God by looking at a cell, right? And how intricate a cell is that God designed. It must be brilliant. And you can learn a lot about God a lot of different ways. But if you actually want to know God, if you actually want to find God, if you actually want to have a relationship with God, and if you want God to actually speak to you in a way that you can actually understand, and if you actually want to become more and more like, He has revealed himself in the Word, in the Scriptures. That is where God is found. Martin Luther had a great quote where he said, the manger where Christ has placed himself to be found is his Word. The Scriptures, if you really want to know God, really want to become close to Him, yeah, you can meditate if you really want, but the place where you're really going to find Him is in His Word, in church, and in studying His Word with fellow Christians. That is where Christ is found. Okay, and the third. Why did Matthew feel the need to tell us this? But why do we have to know about this? Again, the Gospel of Luke, which we normally read at Christmas, talks about the shepherds and the angels and the manger and all this different stuff. And Matthew doesn't really mention that here. Matthew is, all the details that he could have included about Christmas, he doesn't really include any of the stuff that Luke records. He records the Magi. Why? Why does he feel the need to tell you about this? Why? We need to know about this. Well, firstly, to see that Jesus is the fulfillment of all the prophecies of Scripture. Okay, there's a reason I had you read all of Psalm 72. You're probably thinking, oh, it's so long. Why are we reading this? Because you look at what Solomon wrote. It's clearly referring to this great king, and this great king is going to end all oppression. This great king is going to end all violence, all corruption, all evil. He is going to end all poverty. He's going to defend the poor and the needy. The perfect ruler who gives perfect justice and perfect righteousness. He actually creates the perfect society, the perfect world where there's abundance. He knows all the grain and the wheat, that there's going to be food and a harvest and joy. Things. And then you notice, right, there's going to be these royal people who bring him gold. See what Matthew's doing here? He's showing Jesus is that here that Solomon promised, and that Jesus, when he returns, is going to make the perfect society, the perfect world. Secondly, you look at the Isaiah prophecy, right? That there's going to come this time when people from every nation, every tongue are going to come together, and they're going to be united by something greater than ethnicity, greater than blood, greater than culture, that they're going to call each other brother and sister because they are united by one Christ, one Lord, one King. This is the first time that we see Gentiles, non-Jews, actually get to come this close to the God of Israel and worship Him. Then Matthew's showing us that this promise in Isaiah, where foreign people are coming to bring gold and incense, finally this promise has come. And you think about this too. Today, As more and more people come to know Jesus and come to worship him and love him as their God. And even today here in Whitewater, as people from all over, in all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of different things, all come together to worship and love and celebrate and enjoy Jesus as their Savior. This is a continuation of that promise. So that's the first thing. Secondly, most important, Jesus is a God of grace. Jesus is a God of grace. The fact that Magi were allowed to come and worship him means there is no one too sinful. There is no one too guilty. There is no one too blind. There is no one who has been away from church for too long or has been pushing God away for too long. There is no one that is too sinful that Jesus can't forgive and love and cherish and accept that. If God can love and cherish the Magi, he can love and cherish it. Jesus is a God of grace. And without really knowing it, the Magi actually were saying a lot by giving him those gifts, right? They give him gold, which is, typically something, he's rich, he's a king. They give him incense, which, again, they probably thought, hey, this is a nice thing to give to a king. Incense, though, was often used as a way to worship God. Incense is used in worship as kind of our prayers are rising to God. But then they give him myrrh. Do you know what myrrh is? It's this powerful substance that's incredibly sweet smelling, and it was used often to anoint dead people, to keep the rot, the smell away. And when Jesus died, do you know what was actually put on his body? Myrrh. Likely without knowing. The Magi were actually kind of communicating what Jesus came to do. Jesus did not come to be honored. He did not come to be glorified. He did not come to be worshipped. He came to suffer. He came to die. He came to go to the cross and to pay for all the sins, the worst of the worst, like the Magi. He came to die for them and all of us, so that everyone who believes in him, everyone who trusts in him, forgiven and accepted. Kind of an interesting thing too. You notice that in that hymn that we just sang, right? May we ever seek Christ at his mercy seat. Right? And that was in the second stanza of the hymn today. You know what the mercy seat actually is? In the temple, right? You have the Holy of Holies, and that's where the presence of God was. You can't go back there. You can't go in the presence of God if you're a sinner. But once a year, the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies, and he would sprinkle the blood of a sacrifice on the top of the Ark of the Covenant. And that blood would essentially be a payment for his own sins so that he can stand in the presence of God and not die. And he would go and he would pray on behalf of the people and offer sacrifices for the people and say, Lord, because of these sacrifices, have mercy on your people. Accept the death of this sacrifice on behalf of the sins of your people. Forgive your people. Love your people. Kind of interesting then when Jesus dies on the cross, what happens? That curtain that kept the Holy of Holies away from everyone else is torn in two. And you see kind of this cool moment here, where for the first time, sinful people can approach God and glorify him and worship him and give sacrifices to him and not die. That Jesus Christ is the ultimate mercy seat, the ultimate sacrifice. Because of his blood shed on the cross, all of us are completely forgiven, completely saved. That's why, man, Jesus is a God of grace. Given for the Magi, given for you and me. Amen.